No one expected justice to come from the Outer Rim, least of all from a burned-out cargo hauler named Captain Zara Chen. The galaxy had given up on justice centuries ago, settling instead for order, efficiency, and the kind of peace that came from knowing exactly where you stood in the hierarchy. The core worlds ruled, the mid-rim obeyed, and the Outer Rim? The Outer Rim was where people went to disappear. Zara had been disappearing for 3 years now, running freight between forgotten colonies and asking no questions about what she carried. Her ship, the Mercy's Edge, was a patchwork of salvaged parts and stubborn hope, held together by magnetic tape and the kind of engineering that only worked because it had to. She'd learned not to look too closely at her cargo manifests, not to wonder why certain shipments paid triple rates for silence, and definitely not to care about the faces in the news feeds when another colony went dark. But then came Kepler 442c. The distress beacon was old, maybe 2 weeks, broadcasting on emergency frequencies that most ships had stopped monitoring. Zara almost ignored it. Distress calls in the Outer Rim were usually traps, pirates baiting good Samaritans into ambushes. But something about the signal nagged at her, a desperate edge that felt real, raw. Captain, her AI, Marcus, spoke through the ship's comm system, his voice carrying that particular tone of programmed concern. The beacon originates from Kepler 442c. Colony designation, New Harvest. Population, approximately 40,000 civilians. Zara frowned at her navigation display. New Harvest wasn't on any of the major trade routes, barely a blip on the colonial registry. What kind of emergency? Unknown. The signal is automated, standard distress protocol. However. Marcus paused, processing. I'm detecting unusual energy signatures from the planet's surface. Pattern suggests orbital bombardment, recent. The words hit Zara like ice water. Orbital bombardment meant military action, meant someone with serious firepower had decided New Harvest was a problem that needed solving. In the core worlds, that would mean investigations, tribunals, consequences. Out here, it just meant silence. She changed course. The planet hung in space like a bruised fruit, its blue-green surface marred by massive scorch marks visible even from orbit. Entire cities had been glassed, turned to cooling slag that would glow for years. The agricultural domes that had given New Harvest its name were cracked open like eggs, their contents spilling into the toxic atmosphere. But there were survivors. Zara's sensors picked up life signs scattered across the southern continent, clustered in what looked like mining facilities deep underground. Not many, maybe a few thousand out of 40,000, but alive. The distress beacon was coming from there, along with something else, a data burst, heavily encrypted, repeating every 12 minutes. Marcus, can you decode that transmission? Working. Captain, this is highly unusual. The encryption uses core military protocols, but the content. Another pause. It appears to be evidence files. Tribunal documentation, witness testimonies, surveillance footage. Zara's hands tightened on the controls. Military encryption meant this wasn't some random pirate raid or corporate dispute. This was official, sanctioned, legal. And someone down there had the proof. The shuttle bay of the Mercy's Edge had seen better decades, but it still held atmosphere and could deploy her single landing craft. Zara suited up, checking her sidearm more out of habit than hope. If whatever had glassed half a planet decided she was a threat, her little energy pistol wouldn't make much difference. The surface was worse than the orbital view had suggested. The air recyclers in her suit worked overtime filtering out radioactive particles and chemical residue. The ground crunched under her boots, a mixture of glass and ash that had once been topsoil. In the distance, the skeletal remains of a city reached toward the sky like accusing fingers. The mining complex was 3 kilometers down, accessible through service tunnels that had been carved into the planet's crust decades ago. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and Zara's suit sensors kept triggering warnings about structural instability. Whoever had built this place had meant it to last, but no one had planned for it to become a bomb shelter. She found them in what had been the main cafeteria, 47 survivors, mostly miners, and their families, clustered around a makeshift communications array. They looked up when she entered, faces hollow with exhaustion and something worse, the kind of hopelessness that came from watching everything you'd built turn to ash. "You got our signal," said a woman who stepped forward, middle-aged with calloused hands and eyes that had seen too much. "I'm Director Sarah Voss. We've been waiting for anyone, to, what happened here?" Zara interrupted, though part of her already knew she didn't want the answer. Voss's laugh was bitter. "Justice happened. That's what they called it, anyway." She gestured to a young man hunched over a data terminal. "Tommy there, he used to work communications for the colonial administration. Managed to record everything before the bombardment started." Tommy looked up, his face pale and drawn. "It wasn't a military operation," he said quietly. "It was an execution. They gave us 12 hours to evacuate 40,000 people. 12 hours. The pieces were falling into place in Zara's mind, forming a picture she desperately didn't want to see. "Who gave the order?" "Sector Command," Voss replied. "Direct authorization from Admiral Helena Cross herself. Said we were harboring terrorists, providing aid to enemies of the core worlds." Her voice cracked. "We were farmers. We grew food for the colonies that couldn't sustain themselves. That was our crime, feeding the wrong people." Zara felt something cold settle in her stomach. She knew that name, knew Admiral Cross's reputation as a hardline enforcer who believed order was more important than mercy. What terrorists? What enemies? Tommy's fingers flew across his terminal, calling up files. "That's the thing, there weren't any. The evidence they provided was fabricated, cobbled together from surveillance footage of perfectly legal trade negotiations. But by the time we could prove it..." He gestured helplessly at the ceiling, toward the ruined world above. "Why hasn't anyone reported this? Where's the Galactic Tribunal, the Colonial Rights Commission?" Voss and Tommy exchanged glances. "Who do you think authorized it?" Voss asked quietly. "Cross didn't go rogue. She had backing, signatures from the highest levels. The tribunal ruled on New Harvest 6 months ago, declared us an enemy settlement. The bombardment was just cleanup. The weight of it settled on Zara like a physical thing. This wasn't some rogue military action or bureaucratic mistake. This was justice, at least as the core worlds defined it. Legal, documented, approved through proper channels. 40,000 people had died because a committee somewhere had decided they were inconvenient. "The data burst you're transmitting," Zara said. "What's in it?" Tommy pulled up another file. "Everything. The fabricated evidence, the real communications logs, testimony from survivors. Proof that New Harvest never harbored terrorists, never aided enemies of the state. We were murdered for the crime of feeding refugees from other destroyed colonies. And you're broadcasting this why?" "Because someone needs to know," Voss said simply. "Maybe no one will care. Maybe the core worlds will spin it as necessary military action against a hostile population. But the truth needs to exist somewhere, even if it's just in a data stream shouting into the void." Zara stared at the terminal, at the endless scroll of evidence documenting not just a massacre but the careful, legal process that had made it possible. Her whole life, she'd told herself that justice was complicated, that the people in charge knew things she didn't, that the system might be flawed but it was still better than chaos. But this wasn't complexity. This was murder with paperwork. "I can get you off-world," she said finally. "My ship can take maybe 60 people if we strip out the cargo bay. There are colonies in the independent systems that would take refugees. We're not leaving," Voss said firmly. "This is our world. Our home. What's left of it? There's nothing left. You're living in a mine shaft under a glass desert. And if we run, who tells our story? Who speaks for the 40,000 who can't speak for themselves?" Voss gestured to the communications array. "That signal is all we have left. The moment we stop broadcasting, New Harvest becomes just another dead world, another acceptable casualty in the Corps' expansion. Zara wanted to argue, to point out the futility of their position, but something in Voss's eyes stopped her. She'd seen that look before, in the mirror, back when she still believed in things like right and wrong. Before 3 years of running cargo for people who paid well and asked no questions had worn away her edges. "What do you want from me?" Tommy looked up from his terminal. "Help us amplify the signal. Your ship has a military-grade communications array, doesn't it? If we could boost our transmission, get it to reach the major trade routes. You want me to help you broadcast evidence of core military crimes. Do you have any idea what that would make me?" "A criminal," Voss said simply. "By their definition. Just like everyone else who's ever stood up and said, 'This is wrong.'" Zara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 40,000 ghosts settling on her shoulders. She thought about her comfortable life in the gray areas, running cargo and asking no questions. She thought about the look in Voss's eyes, the quiet dignity of people who had lost everything but refused to be silent about it. "Marcus," she said into her comm, "patch into their communications array. I want every file, every piece of evidence, uploaded to our secure servers." "Captain," Marcus replied, his artificial voice somehow managing to convey concern. Such an action would constitute interference in core military operations. "The penalties, I know the penalties." Zara looked around at the survivors, at their makeshift home in the depths of a murdered world. "Do it anyway." The upload took 6 hours. While the data transferred, Zara sat with the survivors, listened to their stories. She learned about the children who had been playing in the agricultural domes when the bombardment started, about the elderly who had been too frail to reach the shelters in time, about the families torn apart in those final 12 hours of desperate evacuation. She learned about justice, too. About the careful process by which 40,000 people had been declared enemies of the state, about the committees and tribunals and review boards that had signed off on their deaths. About the officers who had carried out the bombardment with clean consciences, knowing they had proper authorization. "The worst part," Tommy said as he monitoring the upload progress, "is that they probably believe they did the right thing. Cross, the tribunal judges, all of them. They probably sleep well at night, knowing they protected the core worlds from a terrorist threat." "How do you fight that?" Zara asked. "How do you fight people who are convinced their murders are justified?" "You tell the truth," Voss said quietly. "You tell it loud enough and long enough that eventually, someone has to listen." The upload completed just as Zara's sensors detected incoming ships, 3 core military vessels dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. They'd traced the boosted signal, come to investigate the breach in their carefully constructed silence. "Time to go," Zara said, but Voss shook her head. "You go. Take the data, get it to someone who can use it. We'll keep broadcasting as long as we can. They'll kill you." "They already killed us," Tommy said matter-of-factly. 3 years ago, when they decided we were inconvenient. We're just ghosts now, Captain. Ghosts with a story to tell." Zara wanted to argue, to force them to come with her, but she understood. This was their choice, their final act of defiance against a system that had declared them non-persons. She couldn't take that away from them. The run to hyperspace was close. The core ships had deployed fighters, fast interceptors that nearly caught the Mercy's edge before she could jump. But Marcus had plotted a course through an unstable nebula, using the electromagnetic interference to mask their escape vector. "Where to, Captain?" the AI asked once they were safely in hyperspace. Zara stared at the tactical display, at the data files now stored in her ship's memory cores. 40,000 lives reduced to terabytes of evidence, testimony from the dead transmitted by the almost dead to a galaxy that might not care. The independent systems. "Find me someone with a powerful transmitter and loose morals. May I ask your intentions?" "We're going to tell a story, Marcus. The kind of story that makes people uncomfortable, makes them question what they think they know about justice." She paused, thinking of Voss and Tommy and the others, still broadcasting from their underground tomb. And then we're going to see if anyone still cares about the difference between legal and right. The first transmission went out 2 days later from a pirate broadcast station in the Kepler Drift, a notorious haven for smugglers and political dissidents. The station master, a grizzled ex-military type named Dutch, had taken one look at the new harvest files and agreed to broadcast them for free. Been wondering when someone would finally document one of Cross's pacification operations, he said as his technicians prepared the transmission array. Woman's been glassing colonies for years, always with proper paperwork. The broadcast reached 17 systems in the first hour, spreading through the underground networks that connected the galaxy's forgotten places. By the third day, major news services in the core worlds were running stories about unverified terrorist propaganda and foreign attempts to destabilize core security operations. But people were listening. Zara monitored the responses from her ship, now hidden in the asteroid belt around an abandoned mining system. Some dismissed the evidence as fabricated, others called for investigations that would never come. But there were other voices too, colonists in the Outer Rim who recognized the pattern, refugees who had fled similar pacification operations, military officers who had carried out orders they now questioned. "Captain," Marcus reported, "I'm detecting unusual communication patterns throughout the Outer Rim colonies. Increased encrypted traffic, coordinated message routing, resource stockpiling. Sounds like people are getting organized." "Indeed. Also, I should mention that we are now officially wanted criminals. Admiral Cross has issued a fleet-wide alert for our capture, with a substantial bounty." Zara almost smiled. "Finally made the big leagues, Marcus. What's the charge?" "Terrorism, treason, incitement to rebellion, and violation of military communications security. The recommended sentence is immediate execution upon capture." "Well," Zara said, settling back in her captain's chair, "at least they're being honest about their intentions for once." The message came 3 weeks later, transmitted on an old smuggler's frequency that only a few dozen people in the galaxy still monitored. It was from Voss, her voice thin and tired but still determined. "Captain Chen, if you're listening, and I hope you are, I wanted you to know that we're still here. Still broadcasting. The Corps sent a team to shut us down last week, but they didn't expect us to have rigged the mine shafts with mining charges. Turns out dead terrorists can still bite." Zara found herself smiling despite everything. "More importantly," Voss continued, "we're not alone anymore. Colonies throughout the Outer Rim are refusing to cooperate with core security assessments. 3 systems have declared independence, and the Free Colony Coalition is demanding investigations into Cross's operations. It's not much, but it's a start." The transmission ended with coordinates, a meeting point in neutral space, far from core patrols or independent system enforcement. Zara found them there a week later, a ragtag fleet of cargo haulers, converted passenger ships, and repurposed mining vessels. Refugees from a dozen worlds, survivors of pacification operations, colonists who had fled before the bombardments could begin. They called themselves the Witness Fleet, and they had stories to tell. Captain Elena Vasquez of the New Dawn had escaped Helios 7 with 300 survivors minutes before core destroyers glassed the planet. Commander Jake Morrison of the Perseverance had been a core military officer until he'd been ordered to execute terrorist sympathizers, who turned out to be a children's hospital staff. Dr. Sarah Kim of the hospital ship Healing Light had treated refugees from 6 different worlds, all of them officially designated as enemy casualties. They gathered in the cargo bay of the largest ship, a converted colony transport called the Truth's Hammer, and shared their evidence. Thousands of hours of recordings, documents, testimonies from the dead and dying. A catalogue of systematic murder dressed up as military necessity. "We can't fight them," Morrison said during one of their planning sessions. "They have the fleet, the resources, the legal authority. But we can expose them." "To who?" demanded Vasquez. "The core world citizens. They don't care about dead colonists. The Galactic Tribunal. They signed off on half these operations. To each other, Zara said quietly. To the colonies that are still alive, still independent. Help them see what's coming, what the pattern looks like. Dr. Kim nodded slowly. Make it impossible to ignore. Force them to choose between complicity and resistance. They called it the Justice Protocol, a coordinated information campaign that would broadcast the evidence of core atrocities across every communication network in the galaxy simultaneously. Not just the New Harvest files, but everything, years of documented war crimes, fabricated evidence, manufactured threats used to justify genocide. It took 2 months to prepare. They had to crack military encryption, infiltrate communication satellites, and coordinate with underground networks across hundreds of systems. Zara found herself at the center of it all, her ship serving as a mobile command center for the most ambitious act of rebellion the galaxy had seen in centuries. The night before the broadcast, she stood in the Mercy's Edge's observation lounge, staring out at the stars. Marcus materialized his holographic avatar beside her, a simple human figure made of light. Having second thoughts, Captain. Every minute since this started, Zara admitted. We're about to declare war on the most powerful military force in the galaxy. We're going to make enemies of people who glass planets for sport. And yet you continue. Zara thought of Voss and Tommy, still broadcasting from their underground tomb. Of the 40,000 ghosts of New Harvest, and the millions more on worlds that had been pacified over the years. Of the children who would never grow up, the families that would never be reunited, the dreams that had been turned to radioactive glass. Marcus, is justice just whatever the people in charge say it is? The AI considered this for a long moment. My programming suggests that justice is the fair and equitable treatment of all sentient beings according to established law and moral principles. But what if the law is wrong? What if the people writing it are murderers? Then, Marcus said quietly, perhaps justice becomes the responsibility of those who remember what it should look like. The Justice Protocol launched at 0800 Standard Time, coordinated across 300 systems simultaneously. The evidence burst through every major communication network in the galaxy, news feeds, emergency broadcasts, military channels, private communications. For 6 hours, you couldn't turn on a screen anywhere in civilized space without seeing the truth about New Harvest, Helios 7, and dozens of other worlds. The response was immediate and explosive. The core world's communication networks crashed under the load of traffic. Emergency sessions were called in the Galactic Senate. Colonial governments throughout the Outer Rim declared martial law, not to suppress the broadcasts but to protect themselves from expected retaliation. Admiral Cross appeared on core military networks within 12 hours, her face calm and controlled as she addressed the galaxy. The terrorist propaganda broadcast this morning represents a coordinated attack on galactic security and order, she said. The fabricated evidence and manipulated testimonies are designed to undermine legitimate military operations against hostile populations. Make no mistake, this is an act of war against all civilized worlds. But her words fell flat. Too many people had seen the evidence, heard the testimonies, connected the patterns. The fabricated evidence was too obvious, the testimonies too genuine, the documentation too complete. Zara monitored the responses from her hiding place in the Kepler drift, watching as the galaxy slowly woke up to what had been done in its name. Colonial militias armed themselves. Independent systems formed mutual defense pacts. Even some core worlds began questioning their government's actions. Captain, Marcus reported, I'm detecting massive fleet movements throughout core space. Admiral Cross appears to be mobilizing for large-scale military operations. Let me guess, more pacification missions. It would appear so. However, I should note that many of the target colonies are now actively preparing for siege warfare. The Justice Protocol appears to have eliminated the element of surprise. 3 months later, Zara found herself back at New Harvest, or what was left of it. The mining complex was still there, still broadcasting, but now it wasn't alone. Ships from the Free Colony Coalition orbited the dead world, their crews working to establish a memorial and refugee center in the underground facilities. She found Voss in what had once been the mining complex's main cafeteria, now converted into a communication center that coordinated relief efforts across the outer rim. The older woman looked up as Zara entered, and for the first time in months, she was smiling. "Captain Chen. I wondered if you'd come back. Had to see how the story ended." Voss gestured to the screens around them, showing news feeds from across the galaxy. The core worlds were in chaos, their government torn between factions demanding Cross's arrest and others calling for expanded military action. The independent systems had formed a defensive alliance, sharing resources and intelligence to prevent future massacres. Even some core worlds were threatening to secede if the atrocities didn't stop. "It's not ending," Voss said. "It's just beginning." For the first time in centuries, people are asking the right questions about justice, about who gets to decide what's legal and what's right. And Cross? Still in command, still planning operations. But now everyone knows what those operations really are. Makes it harder to find volunteers, harder to justify the casualties. Voss paused, looking at one of the screens showing refugee ships departing for safe systems. "We saved some of them, Captain. Not all, not nearly enough, but some." Zara nodded, thinking of the thousands of lives that had been saved by early warnings, evacuation orders, and mutual defense pacts. The Justice Protocol hadn't stopped the killing, but it had made it harder to hide, harder to justify, harder to ignore. "Tommy asked me to give you something," Voss said, holding out a data chip. "It's a recording, made just before he died. Core ground forces found the backup communication center last week." Zara took the chip with steady hands, though something cold settled in her stomach. "He's gone. Went down fighting, apparently. Took 3 soldiers with him and bought us time to evacuate the civilians to deeper levels." Voss's voice was matter-of-fact, but Zara could see the grief in her eyes. "Play it when you're ready." He had something important to say. Back on the Mercy's edge, Zara sat alone in her quarters and activated the chip. Tommy's face appeared on her personal screen, thinner than she remembered, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Captain Chen, if you're watching this, it means I didn't make it out of the latest core assault. That's okay, I never expected to survive this long anyway. But I wanted to tell you something before. He paused, gathering his thoughts. 3 years ago, when the bombardment started, I thought justice was something that happened to other people. Something the strong did to the weak, the government did to citizens, the core did to the colonies. I thought it was just another word for power, another way of dressing up murder and calling it legal." Tommy's image flickered as explosions echoed in the background. "But watching you, watching Director Voss, watching everyone who picked up our signal and decided to do something about it, I realized I was wrong. Justice isn't something that happens to you. It's something you do. It's the choice to tell the truth when lying would be easier. It's the decision to help when walking away would be safer. It's the courage to say, this is wrong, even when everyone else is saying, this is legal." More explosions, closer now. Tommy glanced over his shoulder, then back at the camera. "We didn't stop the killing, Captain. Maybe we never will. But we changed the conversation. We made it impossible for them to hide behind paperwork and legal justifications. We made the galaxy see what justice really looks like when it's filtered through committee meetings and military protocols." He smiled then, young and tired and somehow peaceful. "I don't know what happens next. Maybe the core wins, maybe they find a way to spin this as necessary military action. Maybe in 100 years, New Harvest will just be a footnote in some history book about colonial rebellions. But right now, today, people know the truth. And that has to count for something." The recording ended with Tommy looking directly at the camera, his final words clear and unwavering, "Don't let them make this legal. Don't let them turn murder into justice. Someone has to remember the difference." Zara sat in the dark for a long time after the message ended, thinking about justice and legality and the 40,000 ghosts of New Harvest. She thought about the choice between safety and truth, between comfort and courage. She thought about the young man who had died believing that broadcasting the truth could somehow balance the scales against institutional murder. Maybe he was right. Maybe telling the story was enough, maybe bearing witness was its own form of justice. Or maybe justice was something larger, something that required not just truth but action, not just exposure but consequence. "Marcus," she said into the darkness. "Yes, Captain." "Plot a course for the core worlds. I want to visit Admiral Cross." "Captain, that would be exceptionally dangerous. Your presence in core space, I know the risks." Zara stood, feeling something settle into place inside her chest, something that had been missing for 3 years of running cargo and asking no questions. But Tommy was right about one thing. Justice isn't something that happens to you. It's something you do. And what exactly do you intend to do? Zara looked at the data chip in her hand, at the record of a young man who had died believing the truth could make a difference. Outside her viewport, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human concepts of right and wrong. But humans weren't indifferent. Humans could choose. "I'm going to finish the story," she said. "And then I'm going to let the galaxy decide what justice really means." The Mercy's Edge turned toward the core worlds, carrying its cargo of truth into the heart of the empire that had tried to bury it. Behind them, New Harvest continued its eternal broadcast, 47 voices speaking for 40,000 dead, refusing to let murder become merely legal. In the end, maybe that was enough. Maybe justice wasn't about punishment or revenge or even stopping the killing. Maybe it was just about refusing to let the truth die with its witnesses. Maybe it was about making sure that somewhere, someone remembered the difference between legal and right. The stars offered no answers, but they didn't need to. The choice had already been made, broadcast across the galaxy in the voices of the dead and the courage of the living. Justice wasn't something that happened in courtrooms or committee meetings. It was something that happened in mining shafts and cargo holds and the hearts of people who decided that truth mattered more than safety. The galaxy would decide what to do with that truth. But at least now, finally, it would have to choose.